Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Today's featured guest is Rick Wormeli, a gentleman with a keen mind and a stellar reputation as an author, a keynote speaker, and a professional development provider. Furthermore, when you speak with Rick, you get his complete attention. He doesn't leave you in mid-sentence to move on to another conversation. He is indeed a gentleman. Rick's most popular books include Fair Isn't Always Equal, second edition, Metaphors and Analogies, Power Tools for Teaching Any Subject, Summarization in Any Subject, 60 Innovative Tech-Infused Strategies for Deeper Student Learning, second edition, and many more. Rick writes mainly for Stenhouse, AMLE, and ASCD. Occasionally, he'll write for affiliates, and he also does letters to the editor for community issues dealing with equity, grading, differentiation, building tenacity, motivation, and looking at the adolescent and the young adolescent and some of their problems and situations. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, Rick has a keen mind. He knows many things about many things, but he also recognizes the significance of the things he knows. I have sat in on his presentations, and the audience hinges on his every word. It is unique to find an author with both a quick wit and a deep understanding of subject matter that he is able very simply to connect in a wide variety of ways. Rick Wormeli, welcome to An Author's Journey.
Wow, thank you very much, Joe. And may I just say, I'd like to sit and listen to you read the tax code, and I would find that engaging. What a wonderful voice. Thank you for this.
Thank you. That's a nice compliment. Okay, we're going to begin the interview. This question is something that I like to ask all my guests. What's your motivation for writing? What brings you to the computer and gets those juices flowing?
Well, I use writing a heck of a lot to sort out my own thinking. So like right now, I'm writing an article on critical race theory. And what does it really mean, for educators, K-12? And I want to sort my thinking. So I'm doing a ton of research. I'm reading other people's commentary, observations. I put together what I have already understood about it from several decades of it being just kind of in the ether out there. But now it's exploded and it's become very urgent in our conversations. And there is a rising toxicity, divisiveness in churches, family, neighborhoods, academics, legislatures, and so on. And a part of me rises to the occasion because of a sense of fairness and justice and wanting to, help remedy an injustice or be a part of a solution rather than being complicit in the perpetuation of any kind of, oppressive thing or diminishing of anybody else. But when I sit down to write, particularly nonfiction, I'm trying to figure out what I really know. And I love the discovery, the old writing tool of, sit down and write for 15 minutes. And then whatever you're writing at 15-minute mark, take that, lift it, and put that as the start of your new writing, because that's where a lot of that depth is. And I'm very much like that. I will also tell you that I'm a pretty immature writer. In other words, I write what I want to write about, what I'm in the mood to write about in the moment. And if somebody assigns me a writing, I will delay, I will put off if my heart isn't into it. So I think a big part of it is I'm going to bust, I'm going to pop if I don't sort out the thinking and put it in sentences. And I think I'm a better thinker, and doer and teacher for having written about something, having sorted it out in paper, and then I go off and do whatever it happens to be.
Well, how much planning and revision goes into your writing? And does that revision process ever seem to take even longer than the initial process of writing down your thoughts?
Well, I'm struck by Michael Crichton, who said, great books are never written, they're always rewritten. And I find the value in so many of the manuscripts really comes out in the revision, not the initial, setting, pen or to page or keyboard stroke to keyboard, that it's really the vision afterwards. I love that one of my favorite things at all in the writing process is you write, you're really into it and everything, and then you walk away from it for a number of days so you have fresh eyes. You're not caught in the vortex of subjectivity, blind to the limit, the weak writing here and there, or the overwriting, over there. And you see it with those fresh eyes. And then you start going, oh man, I can make that so much more cogent. Let me do this. You know what? This thing over here, that really should be moved up higher in the moment. And it makes far more sense. To me, that's puzzle solving. And that's aha epiphany stuff. What often happens is I'm doing that, that second go around, and I go, oh, wait, I should have been talking more about this, or I need to bring in more of this thing over here. And I get other ideas and things to add to it. So I love that moment. The problem is if you tinker and over tinker and over tinker and over revise, and you never get it to a point where you're willing to let it go and have other people critique it, and get it out there. You're just playing with it over and over again. It's almost like you're in love with the idea of writing, but you really don't want to actually get it out there and and have somebody respond to it. But I think that's kind of the mode that I'm in most of the time, and that's what I find most valuable. And the revision process I love more than the original drafting process, even though of course you get excited.
Now, you work a lot with teachers, I know, and a lot with administrators. And some of those teachers teach writing a lot more often than some of the others do. And sometimes it deals with personal style, it deals with curriculum, it deals with a whole bunch of things. Is there advice that you would give to writing teachers to say, I know that you do things this way, but have you ever tried looking at it another way?
Yeah, I would say read John Warner. His stuff is really good. He's at the university level, but his stuff is brilliant. I mean, there are other authors out there that, we can say, hey, look at them and how they do that. The thing that strikes me is most powerful is that we have writing models, and writing formulaically never serves. It's the idea that you teach writing models and how to bust the models or use hybrids of multiple models. So, nobody usually says in the larger world, post high school or post university, please write in this formulaic model. You can say, here are the conventions of documentation for computer software. Here are the conventions for university writing, research writing, narrative. But the way you write math and mathematical related things, there's a syntax and semantics to writing math. There is a literacy, syntax, semantics for writing science, which is different than writing history. It's different than writing these things. We are great mathematicians because we know how to write and read mathematics. We are great scientists because we know how to write and read science, and so on. That follows. And I would say, yeah, teach all those conventions, but just as important, in fact, sometimes more important, is how to innovate and toss the conventions to the wind if it serves audience and purpose and engages in a new way. So the idea of finding authentic voice that extends or transcends what the current generation thinks is excellent. The idea that I would move to one side and let me not limit you to my imagination. There are a lot of teachers in writing, let alone in some other subjects, who teach so the students get equal to them. But our goal ultimately is that the next generation surpasses us, not gets equal to us. And I am guilty of that. Earlier in my teaching of writing, and I've taught 5 different subjects at a variety of levels, but I have taught writing before, and get kids just equal to what I know and then say, time to take a test. No, it's see what I do with you, facilitating your journey as a launching pad, and you will achieve escape velocity, to kind of keep the analogy going there, and not just sit around and listen to your echo chambers. So let me expose you to a variety of mentor texts and let you see which one resonates. Take that, incorporate in your writing, and now here's some more mentor texts and authors. Take what you want of that to resonate, and eventually, with multiple exposures, you find your genuine voice, and now others will look to you for the mentor text and the inspiration for their own endeavor.
It's interesting to approach writing that way. You and I think very similarly. And I've had students who do not follow the set procedure, the set formula. And I've pulled them to the side and said, look, you don't follow the rules and the regulations, but what you're doing is making perfect sense because I can see you in this piece. I can feel your feelings in this piece. And please don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't write this way. If they do, and I know grades are important, well, you learn how to write that way for that class, but you don't leave it behind you either.
You
And
know,
I think those are the
I'm sorry, go
successful
ahead.
writers. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's a part of education is let me teach you how to take tests like timed writings, which are just ridiculous and abhorrent. Not really a test of writing at all, but more a test of how do you do with inappropriate high stakes testing than it is for writing.
Correct.
But let me teach you how to write to have a hassle-free life. But let me also teach you how to write to find meaning and resonance in life and discover who you are through your writing and find joy in that. And I think it's okay that you teach both the dichotomy of both of those. It's not the end of the world. We'll teach you how to play the game, follow the rules, but man, break the rules.
It's interesting you say that. I had students for years now writing poetry, and I usually tell my students, because they're seventh graders, try to stay away from rhyme, because what
Oh,
I
yeah,
find with young writers is you end up doing nursery rhymes. Moon,
yeah.
Spring, and June are fine, but they don't really give you the essence of what's there. But there have been occasions where I've had kids use rhyme and basically blow me away. I pulled one kid aside and I said, look, this sounds like Shel Silverstein. This is really good. It's creative. It's wonderful. Don't worry about the rhyme. Keep going, because I know that you know how to do the regular type of writing. You're proving that to me in this writing. So yeah, I think that that's one of the things that as writers, as authors, we need to be aware of and relate that to our students, that there is room for the flexibility. There's room for the individuality. And the individuality almost seems to be that abstract that you try to help them to at least find, if not realize.
I think that's really true. I think there's a middle passage, so to speak,
Yeah.
where people who are writing professionally, whether poetry, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is, go through a phase of let me try to see how clever I am. And in the rhyme, oh, I found just the right word that rhymes and actually perpetuates my message. You know, it fits perfectly, and the meter is there, and the cadence, and you just feel you're in love with that. And the moment of true writing is when you can transcend that and accept it's not about being clever. It is about taking someone's breath away. It is about somebody seeing themselves in this and not being aware of the written page.
Just went away.
Hey, you just went out and I'm still on. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. You were talking and then poof.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird? It went out and then it came like right back. Anyway, I think the moment that you realize you're not writing to marvel at yourself, you're writing to really evoke something in the reader that is a strong force within you, is one of the moments we realize, oh, I'm going to use words, sentences, phrasings, references in the service of this larger thing, not just for their own selves. But I think everybody, honestly, has to go through that stage of playing with words and trying to be impressive to see what you're capable of. Let me try this tool. Oh, try that tool. Because I think we do emulate some of the best. And then when we incorporate it, I mean, Stephen King and so many others have written about that. You emulate these, his was Raymond Chandler. Write like that. And eventually you get this idea of, I can combine these and this is uniquely different. I'm okay. But I needed stepping stones. And that's not a bad thing. It's really okay, just as long as you recognize what it is.
Now, when you look at the writing process from your own perspective, I know that everybody approaches writing a little bit differently, and we all use it for different purposes. And you use it, as you said, to kind of clarify your thinking, to give it a framework, give it a direction. So I'm going to ask you then, what's the most challenging part of that whole process of writing for you? And what's the easiest part?
Well, when I write a book, I'm an immature writer in this regard. I write the easy stuff first, the stuff I have strong opinions about, because it flows. And I feel like, oh, I'm being productive. So I'm okay. I get a lot of words, on the page or on the screen, so to speak. And I feel like, wow, I'm doing that. And nothing motivates like success. Like you're doing stuff, you're moving forward, right? And then, of
Correct.
course, you come back a few days later, look at it and go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? But I do write that. Here's the thing I found, though. I dread the boring stuff, but I know nonetheless it is important for the overall book and its success to be meaningful to teachers. I need to write and really research and be thoughtful about that thing. And so I delay it. I put it off and I put it off and put it off. Writing the good, the fun stuff, first. Every time I do that, I'm totally serious. I don't know why this happens and why I haven't learned from my mistake. But every single time I write the hard stuff, the stuff I've been delaying on, and then I got to figure out a transition between that, how it fits in the larger picture of this earlier stuff that was very passionate. I discover how much fun it is to write about that other stuff. I finally did the thinking. It had to percolate, it had to bubble up a little bit more. I guess that's why I was delaying it. And then I get into it and I go, this isn't bad at all. This is like really cool. And it fits here, 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 here. And so I'm struck by the mind likes to see patterns, relationships, and connections. That's the way we think. And when things are discrete individual pieces, we're still very much the novice. And experts think in chunks and they can see the overall and assimilate more than one thing. And when I'm writing about something that's fairly new to me, I tend to not be able to assimilate. But once I get in there and I've got these early pieces, the passionate pieces, and then I start getting into these other stuff, I start seeing connections. And that's woohoo. I love that. That's a you're on fire moment. You could do no wrong and you go for it. And now you get this critical mass of your book and you go, okay, I'm going someplace. But you have to be open to, when you write the tough stuff and the connections there, this is now something enjoyable because it is meaningful to you. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I tend to do the easy stuff first because I'm passionate. It might be a controversial thing and I have strong opinions. Go for it. Yeah. And the other stuff might be just boring. I feel like I'm doing a dissertation or some kind of a book report, for some really demanding teacher, and the book has no meaning to me. And I slog through it and suddenly I go, whoa, this is much better than I thought. So I don't know if that helps or not.
What it sounds like you're saying to me is that there's a lot of the artistic process here. As a sculptor sees a form that has all the little pieces removed and shaped and turned before the first blade ever touches the clay or the first hammer touches the stone. And the painter sees the entire painting on the canvas or a good portion of it without ever touching the brush to the canvas. There's that vision of not only what is, but what is anticipated to be. And it sounds like there's a lot of discovery. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like contour or cadence writing too. I'm always trying that out in my interior monologue, I guess, is running through my head, where I'm getting sentences of certain structures and there's a rhythm to them. And they might be longer, more complex. And then I need to punch it. I need to do a very short sentence that really nails something home, so it's fluid, it's airy writing or whatever it is. And suddenly, and then we knew the difference, period. Like it's its own paragraph. And that's like, oh, right. And that's when it all turned. That's when we turned the corner. Like, whoa, where'd that come from? I like jarring, the structure. Everybody's expecting, here's the flow, and then suddenly, boom, twist. It's a slightly different structure. And now you're back into it if you were lost in reverie in the moment or thinking about something else. And that to me is a physicalization. So when you say, and you make the analogy of sculpture, I agree wholeheartedly.
You remind me of a book I read way back when I was in graduate school, Sound and Sense by Lawrence Perrine. And Lawrence Perrine talked about not only the essence of the meaning, the semantics of the piece, but the sound of it. It has to have the proper tone, the proper music to it. And he used a lot of poetry, for example, but I think if they were to update the book or to rewrite the book in any way, that prose could easily become very much a part of that, because as you said earlier, you write differently for science than you do for math, than you do for the social sciences, than you do for fiction, that they all have those differences, and those differences seem to be in a music.
Yeah. And right. And so do you hear the tune? Do you choose to dance to the tune? Or do you keep the tune, but then do a jazz riff on it that brings your voice and add something to it that wasn't already there? That's one thing people worry about a lot in education writing is, well, other people have said this, other people do this, and say, well, no, we haven't heard you and your version of that. So what am I adding to this that's uniquely Rick or brings a different perspective that would help somebody else? And in particular, to help somebody else see themselves doing it rather than me writing a memoir of me doing it. So one of the things that I'm always conscious of is I never use first person singular, and because that's I do this, I had this, me had this, away I, and I don't use second person because that can be defensive, like you should. I always use the inclusive first person plural. We all have students who might be disrupting our class from time to time. Many of us have experienced a lot of worry about providing feedback to our students and their learning. It's we're in this together. Let's walk the path together rather than you do your thing and I do my thing, and you never see yourself doing the stuff I'm describing or encouraging you to do.
And there's a strength in that unity as well. There's a feeling of not only companionship, but there's a feeling of the shared vision. We talk a lot in leadership about shared vision, and it's powerful because it's shared, because you're doing this with the reinforcement, with the accompaniment of others. There's a whole ambiance for sitting and listening to a solo artist, but there's a different ambiance when you bring in different musicians, and maybe you bring in different voices, and the sound changes and the technique changes. And as you said, the jazz is taking something off and doing the riff from your perspective. And I think what you say rings true.
Well, I think it's like, when you're involved in writing groups, which I highly recommend. I've always had great success. And here in the Washington, D.C. area where I'm located, we have the Bethesda Writing Center and, other ones that are around the area. In Northern Virginia, Maryland, D.C., there's a lot of them. But it's also a shared vulnerability. I've been there with you. Let's walk together. This is scary, but let's, maybe if we do one little bit at a time, we can make something of it. And I think there's a lot of in me, but let alone other writers. Who am I to do this great thing? Who am I to imagine that I would have anything that would affect others in some way that is either magical or inspirational or practical, what we're trying to do. That's a scary thing. And so, we're, I guess, figuratively holding hands, but at least we're walking together and sharing the space, but not just shared leadership and writing, but shared vulnerability. It's a fragile thing, and that's okay. But I think it creates the camaraderie, that we're going through those things together.
And it also affects the tone of the piece, because if you're too sure, then no one likes the perfect solution, because we know that things aren't perfect and perfect solutions really don't exist. If we try to sell them that way, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah. And I also, I think, what if I made a litany? Here are 50 ideas for writing. You'd be overwhelmed, and it'd be off-putting, truly. Right. Well, they got all those ideas. Who am I? I've got like one idea, maybe three. And so when we work with writers or ourselves, we really need to focus on just 2 or 3 elements at a time and not be overwhelmed. And in every single engagement, it's let me help you invite your life and have a seat at learning's table, so to speak. You see your culture, you see your identity as honored, and your earned insights, your inherited narrative are valued here. And let me show you where you can help make something of that is uniquely yours. And I think that idea of invitation is powerful. In fact, Avi, the young adult author Avi, Nothing But the Truth, Crispin, and True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, and so many more. he one time said in one of the NCTE magazines, National Council of Teachers of English, which Joe, I know you know very well.
Yes.
He one time said that, the great book's always written as a C and never an O. And what he meant by that is, of course, a lot of people write a first book and they say, here's everything that's happening. Here's what you should be seeing, feeling, thinking, and here's what you should be, how you should be reacting. Just sit there and receive, you passive recipient. And those books don't sell. The books that sell is when the author doesn't spell every single thing out. It's not passive, it's active. You have to fill in. So it's just a C. There's a portion of the O that is open where you insert your life, your reactions, and that's the book that sells, that makes one adult to another or one child to another. This book moved me so much, I want to share it with you. And now oh, that's something. This was an experience for me, and I want to connect with you by sharing the same experience. So are you invitational on that? Do you go out of your way to make sure that's invited rather than, dissuaded or, pushed back? It's huge.
I have to give a shout out to Avi because he was my college librarian.
Ha! That's just great.
He was the librarian
He's quite the unique character, but boy,
yeah.
He's been inspirational for so many. What an amazing experience, Joe.
He was at the College of New Jersey, which was then Trenton State College.
Yes,
and
of course.
We would look at him and say, he's the quietest person we have ever seen. Right. He would go about, he would do his job. He would be in the office, filing, listening, doing whatever. And we heard him talk one time and we all kind of looked at each other and said, okay, so we were right. He does have a voice.
Yeah, exactly.
And we said it kiddingly, but he was always just so much in the moment of what he was doing. It just seemed in a comfort zone.
That's true. I mean, that we give ourselves permission to enter flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I've got a book, I'm in flow. And, family is important, and personal health is important. They make you the people that you are. Yes, so we have to be mindful of that. But there have been plenty of times working on manuscripts where I've said, no, daddy's not available right now. I'm so sorry. Or to my wife, could you do this for the family because I'm on deadline, or I've just got this thing, and if I don't get it down, it's going to be lost. And because of their love, I've been able to pursue it. But boy, I am, as fast as I possibly can, I'm turning around and saying, okay, I'm all yours. Please go do what you want to do. I will take care of things here.
And that's making a nice balance, which makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I like that sense that there's a certain zeal, and every radar antenna you have as you go grocery shopping, as you go for a hike, is all revolving around the book that is rising in your subconscious. And you're thinking how to solve a particular challenge. And suddenly, when you're doing something else, the subconscious rises, you go, I've got that idea. Let me write that down real quick. So I'm a real big believer in long car trips, long walks, bike rides, folding the laundry, raking leaves, mowing the lawn, anything where it's just a repetitive act and you allow the creative self to rise.
Agreed. Now, what inspires you as a writer? Is there something or someone that inspires you?
I think for nonfiction and class and writing, and just, dang, I wish I had written that sentence. It's William Zinsser, Writing to Learn. I think it was 1988, and his series of editorials, Zinsser. Man, he was the one that sold me back in the mid 80s that you can write your way into an understanding of anything, and the eloquence. And the respect for so many things about what she wrote was just beautiful. And it was one of the first times, as somebody who's in the adult world trying to write professionally, that I just said, that's just beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. Even though it was, cogent and right to the point, it was about nonfiction. It just opened up a world. So I would say William Zinsser is one of the biggest ones. There are others. Is it Ellen Keene, I guess? Who wrote quite a bit for NCT or Scholastic. I'm trying to think of a few others. There are people who combine sciences, archaeology, and history, and wonderful, fictionalized versions, like Walter Isaacson and David McCullough, things like that. That really, Ken Follett, yeah,
Yeah.
is somebody who does that pretty well. It takes the history of things and kind of weaves it together and creates suspense. I mean, that's really inspiring too. Weirdly, I only published nonfiction because I'm too chicken, but I love writing fiction. And I have since I was a kid. I wrote fiction starting in second grade. We still have some of my second grade stories. And
Well,
I did all the reading, the Hardy Boys. I read every single Sherlock Holmes mystery. I mean, seriously, I have compendiums. I can smell the pages to this day of me with the flashlight under the blankets reading all the Sherlock Holmes, all of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And so, and many of the other ones. Ray Bradbury is at the top of my list of just gobsmacking. Wow, this is what I want to do. I want to really get into that. So reading people like that inspires me. And then I want to, give it a try, in the fiction here, but I haven't sent that stuff out. I still work on children's books. I have a grandson for the very first time, a grandchild. And so
congratulations.
I'm really tossing around ideas for early childhood books right now and trying to make them about his adventures as he explores the world and seeing the world from his eyes, not from cynical eyes or jaded eyes of those of us who've lived a little bit longer and gone through that. And what it would be like, especially in the world right now, because he was born during the pandemic. So how do I help him make the world his own and find hope in a role that's compassionate and competent and exciting in the world? It's something I think about. So that inspires me, but great writers inspire me. Like I got to tell you, when I want to write a manuscript for an article or a book, one of the first things I do is I go read somebody I really respect, totally different topic. It doesn't have to be anything related to it. It could be an editorialist for a newspaper I like, or somebody online, or just somebody who just rocks my boat as a writer. And I put that away. And now I sit down to do my, look at, you can't see me right now, but my fingers are on the keyboard like I'm about to play the piano. I play the piano. So there's a lot of analogy there. So I'm sitting down and I'm about to play, and I play at so much higher level for having read ahead of time, even if it's just half an hour, somebody else that I really respect. And it's on a different topic, but on this topic, I'm on fire because I just got the mojo, the jazz from that other person. And I let it just infiltrate every corpuscle of my body.
Whenever I've taught composition, whether it's been at the middle school level, whether it's been at the college level, I'm always amazed to hear the music in some of the pieces that the students are reading.
Yeah.
I've stopped during readings and said to them, "Do you play a musical instrument?" And some will say yes, and I'll tell them, "I can hear the music in your writing." And if they say no, I don't, I always tell them, find someone who's a musician, because you can take that piece and you can convert that into a musical piece. It has the qualities there. So take it and let somebody with that background run with you, run alongside of you, and maybe help to guide you to bring the music that is articulated, not just implied, but articulated in your piece.
That's such a powerful sentiment, and the skill you have, and you've been doing it a lot in this conversation, of taking a look at something in one domain and drawing the analogy in another domain, the music, the writing, and so on, and running with it, all these different things. And I think that's what good writers do. They can explain something that's powerful in terms of something else. Here's the analog and here's the target for that. Let's look at the possibilities here. Let's look at the limitations here. If you want to deconstruct something, that helps you be more analytical. But I think that whole idea of cognitive linguistics of metaphor and analogy and all that stuff is really a gift. And of course, you have that quite well in hand. But that strikes me as something that writers do very well. Let me explain this. And I think a large part of our world, if you look at the quantum world and you look at technology and so on, we're now at a point where we can only explain abstract things in terms of metaphors and other abstract things. Whereas before, we would explain the brain like it was a computer. So we explain something abstract in terms of something we knew physically. But now that's changed. And so I'm explaining string theory or M theory or DNA. Do I explain it as a double helix, or do I explain it as a spider spinning its own web? which has actually been popular in some scientific circles. And how does that metaphor open doors, emancipate thinking once shackled or tethered to something more mundane, or how does it release it? And we move forward. I just love the power of that. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for the really nice compliment. My brain works in strange and mysterious ways, I've been told. Now, I know as a writer, sometimes you and I both will write something and think, okay, that's fairly good. But there's that time when you write something and you sit back and say, I think I nailed it. I really think I got this one. How do you know when it's profound? What goes off?
Wow, that's a good question.
In your mind, what tells you, boy, I've hit this one?
I think sometimes it happens when the reader knows the writer is in control of what's happening, that can have a profound impact. For example, every one of my articles, and as many as possible in the chapters in the books I write, there's an opening, there's an intro. And every ending of an article ties it back up to that opening in some really cool way. I reference it as in a cool way here. Like Cynthia Ryland wrote Something Permanent, a wonderful book with Walker Evans photography from the Great Depression here in the United States. And from the Farm Security Administration, he had been assigned to take photos. And she did a whole series of poems associated with his photos. And Something Permanent is a book I actually hand to adults as a gift. I think it's so good, let alone I use it with students. And I was talking at one time in writing about panic and anxiety and depression and things. And one of the things that she wrote about in one of the poems was, it was a child who was impoverished and obviously in kind of a rundown house, was going through a challenge, and having his photo taken by Walker Evans somehow gave him a sense that for at least once in his life, he was enough. And in the world of anxiety and depression and panic disorders, one of the biggest things that people are concerned about is, am I enough? Am I Hispanic enough, Black enough, white enough, funny enough, athletic enough, male enough, female enough, gay enough, whatever it might be? Am I enough of this thing that others desire, as I try to find my belonging, my role, and things like that? And so I wrote about this, through the whole article. And at the very end, I talked about, and here are the two things, that the messages we want to get across. And, they were very, they were kind of poignant and in the moment. And the last line was something to the effect of, both of which are something permanent. Because I had talked about that before. And I thought, wow, it was only 2 words wrapped up to that. And it was short and right to the point. And there's a punch to that. If I had another sentence explaining the connection, it would have weakened it. I have to trust the reader to make that connection. And I have to have that little zinger punch and not condescend to the reader by explaining things fully, even though I have to do enough so they can make the connection. Does that make sense? And yeah. I think for me, that's magic when that happens.
We run into barriers sometimes that are there. We run into barriers sometimes that are not there. We just imagine, and we look at things with different colored glasses on different occasions. Sometimes emotion becomes the tint to the glass that we're looking through. And yeah, we are emotional beings. And when we try to deny that, I think that's when we end up with more problems than we can even begin to create consciously.
I've been told that in some of the writings, Rick, you're a very brave writer. You make yourself vulnerable, you say things in kind of a common sense way that, we needed to hear. I couldn't say that in my faculty, but you get away with it, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I do, when I write, I realize, am I playing it safe? Am I doing something tame? Or am I doing something that will affect change, that will allow people, that'll be provocative, but also validating of what's going on? And I think that helps a little bit. To me, that lights a fire and makes me feel like, okay, yeah, I've done something here that works. I got to tell you though, I learned from a principal a long time ago, when you write something in a school, like, a letter to parents or your grading policies for the community and that kind of thing, what you should do is write it all out, get it all out there, and then do it again, but cut it completely in half, and then do it again. And that's really helped me. So I usually overwrite, like if a manuscript or a column, they want it to be 3,000 to 4,500 words or something like that. No problem. It usually comes out at 12,000, 10,000, and then I cut it down and cut it down. And by truncating, but trying to find a better action word than all the adverbs I was putting in there, which is lazy writing, right? And so having a more concise example instead of elaborating ad nauseum, ad infinitum, which is what I just did right now. I am my own audiovisual aid, interestingly enough. At any rate, when I cut it again like that, the writing is so much more aha. That was more poignant, more moving than my elaborative, weak writing ever could have achieved. And so that's another, I guess, a suggestion to get to that point of, wow, I nailed it when I practiced that, cut it in half, then cut it half a second time.
Being a minimalist is not the easiest thing to do. And
no, it's not.
We're almost discouraged by that. And I think the folks who teach the little kids how to write sentences are very well intentioned by starting with a base and getting them to expand. But part of the unintended problem is that sometimes kids will process length as equalizing itself to quality. And the length doesn't necessarily translate to quality. It's the message.
Yeah, we're trying to get them past bed to bed stories, as Donald Graves would say. Right. And so elaborate. And so they start thinking, I'll add adjectives and stuff. One of my favorite things to do, and I do it just for myself, let alone when I teach students, is, say the same thing, holding on to the same absolute truth, but say it 10 different ways. And, we start with Jeremy ate pizza. Well, the pizza was eaten by Jeremy. It's passive, but it is the truth.
Right.
Jeremy sank his teeth into the deep dish pie. Grease ran down his chin. Okay. We're elaborating. Play with that. The idea of sentence play and word play it helps with vocabulary acquisition, really helps the writer to go, okay, now I'm more in control. I can play with this a lot of different ways and then see which one sits with me. So if I'm struggling with the sentence structure, I just say, well, let's say it 10 different ways and see which one speaks to us in the moment. And it seems to work. And then the other one I love to do, you have to write the entire paragraph with only one syllable words. Like, oh man, stop getting so in love with your polysyllabic stuff. Get into that one syllable. How do I get that across? And is it more cogent or obscure, obtuse in what I'm trying to say? I don't know. Anyway, it's a fun thing to do.
Those little spins are something that actually it comes in very handy if you're in the business world, if you're in advertising, if you are on a sports network. Sports updates given every 20 minutes or half hour or hour are not the same ones every time with the same information in the same phrasing in the same order, because it would be boring and people would tune out. So they write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And I've been fortunate. I've been able to have some media people come in and talk to my students and show them that one piece can be written 6 or 7 different ways, because this one I'll do at 20 after the hour. This one I'll do at 40 after the hour. This I'll do at the top of the hour.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love that. That's another thing I love doing. We used to have the museum, but now it's closed here in the Washington, D.C. area. But out in front, they would have all the major newspapers from all over the world. And it's fascinating to say, and you can do this now online. It's totally easy to do. But here's the news story from the UK, but here's the same one from China and Thailand, the United States and Australia. How does everybody put the different slant on it?
Yes.
To take a story and look at the different slants really opens it up for you too. Like, well, what is going to be your slant? Your version of this. And is it honoring, the truth, or is somebody paying that particular organization to slant it this way? And then you get into the media literacy and all that. But man, that's huge. That, I never want anybody in the writing to to lack for an intelligent consumer savvy. Like when you read a scary story, you watch a frightening movie, you willingly suspend disbelief. And so you can enjoy it and be scared and have the adrenaline rush.
Sure.
So, what is the writer not saying is just as important as what the writer is saying. So I always want my students to know that they're being manipulated by the writer. And I know that as a writer, I enter into that relationship. I am manipulating you to this particular perspective. I know it. I want you to know I know it. It's helpful. It creates a genuineness.
Rick, you've been very generous with your time. So I want to ask one more question before we wrap this up. There are folks who are listening to the two of us chat. And on your own author's journey, I'm sure that you have picked up little tips and hints along the way. And there are those who say, gee, I wish I could write the way Rick does. I wish I could be as prolific as Rick does. Maybe there's some advice he can give me. Is there something you would tell the writer out there who wants to be a successful writer, whether it's of educational matter, whether it's fiction? I know there's no secret sauce, but is there something that maybe can help to at least get them started?
Well, I got to tell you, I think learning words for their own sake, I'm just going to learn 5 words a week, increase your reading power from Reader's Digest. But just learning words for their own sake is huge because you have to have dexterity. Otherwise, you don't think of any other way that's unique and fresh to say it. So the idea of developing dexterity just by simply using words, and then make sure you use those words in real life, in conversation, because you're trying on the clothing, Goldilocks, to see if it's too tight or too loose. If it gets the response you want, now that's a part of your lexicon or your vocabulary that's just great. Another thing, and this is going to sound really weird because it's what everybody says, I cannot emphasize enough, read in the genre in which you want to write. You really need to do that. There's not an easy shortcut in that. So I love thrillers and murder mysteries, and I'm voracious reading that. I also love undersea thrillers. So submarine stuff, underwater archaeology, every book I can possibly find, fiction, nonfiction. I'm a voracious reader. It lights me up. So I read that stuff, and a lot of my fiction stuff has been in those areas as I plod along and try stuff. So if I'm going to write for education or a technical manual or whatever it is, I'm going to read a lot in that field to see the cadence, the rhythms, the things that people talk about. How do I invite them in and give examples? I'm going to quote a lot of students and teachers because people like that, in education articles. And the other thing I would just say real quickly, as you can see you can't see behind me. If you could see me, behind me, there's a whole bunch of bookshelves.
Yes.
And about a third of those books, and there's a couple hundred behind me, just so you know, a third of them are books on how to write in a variety of genres. Like, how do you create historical authenticity in fiction? There's a couple of books on that kind of thing. What do forensic crime scenes really need to have? Let's learn from the experts before you incorporate forensics in your murder mystery, that kind of thing. And I think it's really easy to get lost in the romance of writing. And the thing that really matters is you write. So don't get lost in reading books or writing so much as get the darn word on the screen or the word on the paper, whether it be a legal pad, which is where a lot of people still love to write, or it be typing it out. Do that. Just start writing. And you know what? Even if it's nonsense and garbage, eventually the little nuggets start coming out, and you might even marvel and go, where did that come from? I like that very much. I'm going to lift that out as a nugget and save it for something down the road because that speaks to me. I think that people get lost. I'm going to write for publication, and they study all these magazines about it, and then they don't sit down and do it. The most intense part, the most enjoyable part, but the most awful part, I know it's 2 different feelings of the same moment, right? Is sitting down and getting the words on screen or paper. But man, does it help you continue? If you just keep reading books and articles about it, you hardly ever do it because you get more and more a sense of wonder and magic and romanticizing just the idea of being a professional writer, and that doesn't serve. So anyway, that's my 3 pieces of advice, let alone what I shared earlier in the interview. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you for taking an author's journey with us today. You're definitely a dynamic, erudite educator. You have a broad base of seemingly limitless knowledge. And I think it's matched only by an incredibly high level of energy. We appreciate your kindness greatly. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. This is an honor to be here. Really, time in your company anytime, time well spent. I hope to listen in on all the other interviews as well.
I appreciate that, Rick. Well, that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For an author's journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.